Sam. I'm talking about the full moon of March 23rd. It's going to be a lunar eclipse as well. It's going to be in Virgo. And the moon will be in Virgo. Rahu, the north node, which is eclipsing the moon, will be in Leo still with Jupiter. So it's an interesting lunar eclipse. It actually follows the solar eclipse that was in Aquarius. So we have this situation where the solar eclipse was in Aquarius, bringing together the sun and moon in Aquarius for that eclipse, which really, galvanized social themes, political themes, your personal, community and your place in it, really brought those themes to a sort of nexus point. And that's really the big cycle for the next, several months, 6 months or so, because the solar eclipse is really what, where the power is getting initiated. So those themes of social duty, responsibility for the next 6 months or so, of course, we can see a lot of political, unrest and cultural clashes and whatnot around the world. So it's very clearly being shown by that solar eclipse. But now the lunar eclipse is the halfway point in the cycle, but this lunar eclipse is not in the opposite sign of Leo. It's actually in the 8th sign of Virgo. So when we get this situation with the eclipses, we have to factor that in, and it's also, we have to factor it in when we get full moons and new moons as well. So in this case, we see that the full moon, or the sort of contrasting balancing point, is not actually in the opposite sign, it's in the one after it, which is much more transformative than it is balancing or harmonizing. So this is the relationship between any sign with its 8th sign, or any house with the 8th house. So any sign, we can use the signs. The 8th sign from it is the one that really transforms and sort of kind of obliterates and destroys it, so to speak. This is why the 8th house is the death house. It's the house of destruction. And, we hear death and we think somebody dying, but it's also the death of whatever it is we're talking about. So, for instance, for Cancer, that sign, the 8th sign, or Aquarius, is the one that completely kills it. For Leo, the 8th sign is Pisces. That's the one that totally kills it or transforms it. For Aquarius, the 8th sign is Virgo. And so the way this works is that, Leo is the contrasting point, which, as I say, shows, let's say, culture and society, which is Aquarius, and Leo, which is like the government and the individuals in the society. And those two things need to come together. This is how a 7th house association works. They're at opposite ends of the spectrum, but ultimately they contain the same principle. So there's a lot of tension there, but very much like two people in a relationship. There are two people, two individuals, and what they share is the relationship. So this is the way a 7th house aspect or any kind of 7th house situation works. The nodal axis, for example, which is what we're talking about when we describe the eclipses, shows the tension between two opposites. It's easy, and if we're unimaginative, if we don't have any imagination, it's easy to say these things are completely opposite. They have nothing to do with each other. That's not true. In fact, they have everything to do with each other because they're in relationship with each other, and meaning that one can only be complete with the other. Let's say like a romantic relationship or a relationship between two people can only happen with the cooperation of the other one. That's what the 7th house is. The society can only be peaceful if the individuals and the government, which would be Leo, is representative. I should say the individuals, each individual in the kingdom and the government, that's what creates the culture. So when you have the 8th house, though, you don't have that common principle. You have the obliteration or the destruction of that thing. Because, for example, like once you get the, let's say what happens when, let's say, two individuals are trying to work things out, when it's I'm an individual, you're an individual, and we're at odds, polarized, because the seventh house is a polarizing, what has to happen is something needs to be utterly destroyed first. Generally, both individuals, let's use the relationship metaphor, they have to destroy their individuality in order to eventually lead back to a harmonizing effect in a relationship. So the eighth house is actually the destruction of the polarity. So with the Aquarius-Leo polarity, if you're looking at it from the Aquarius position, which is the culture and the philosophy of the culture and the will of the masses, let's say, to use a political model, Virgo is the thing that utterly destroys it. Meaning, in fact, we can see it in a political sense that the efficiency or lack of efficiency with, let's say, legislation and the details of how the kingdom is run, which is what Leo is on the larger metaphor. Leo is the kingdom, Virgo is all the details that it takes to run the kingdom like a government, all the government bureaucracy and the hair splitting and the details of how things work and what is specifically and literally said and literally implemented. That winds up being the thing that actually in some ways destroys the will of the people on some, or that is what needs to get kind of sacrificed on some level, or the thing that actually winds up sort of gobbling up the larger principle of the polarity itself, at least from the Aquarius point of view. So basically what I mean to say is, let's look at a political situation. When we have, let's use political parties, let's say Democrats and Republicans. Each one of them can focus back on the government as an issue, but then what tends to make that argument sort of disappear and what really destroys it and then starts to transform it literally is doing something like focusing on an election and the details and the specifics of taking a very specific action to change the tension or to break the tension of the polarity. Or from the point of view of the culture, let's say what a Democrat would find infuriating would be the details and the specifics of, let's say, a Republican. What the Republicans find nauseating and infuriating are the details and the policies and the specifics and the implementation of the Democrats. And so this is a metaphor for our life where we're really kind of focusing on very big themes right now. We're focusing on large themes in our life, like how we fit in society, our larger themes and principles, the world we inhabit. And we can look to something like the government and try to solve that, but ultimately what completely destroys it and transforms it, rather than just keeping that tension going, is all of the details and the specifics that we need to enact. We need a different policy. Let's stay with the political model for a second. We need actually different policies, different details to be managed. Like in the next election in the US, there's going to be very specific things that we need to focus on. And we need to get out of the stress and the tension between us and the government, us and this, and actually focus on the narrow and the small and the specific. And that's what you also see happening a lot in the political climate in the US, where for a long time, especially on the Republican side of the aisle, there's been this man Donald Trump just kind of blowing the whole thing up, and now they're finally starting to focus on the details of what this man is saying. And the entire Republican Party itself is revolting against him, not to mention the Democrats. Finally, they're starting to look at the details and the specifics, instead of like just, oh, he'll blow up or he'll implode or some version of that. We're also seeing on the Democratic side in the US as well that they're starting to maybe look in a more high leverage way at the Bernie Sanders and the Hillary Clinton, and what are the specific policies and the nuts and bolts of who can win an election, who can advance their collective agenda. It's not just about a bigger vision, it's about the nuts and bolts practicality behind it. So policies, specifics, narrow details are what ultimately takes the concepts of culture and government, and our power needs to be reflective of the people, and all those things that has a lot to do with this eclipse, and brings it down into something much more narrow. Once we start focusing on the thing that's much more narrow, we obliterate and we actually completely destroy the argument, and we take it out of the polarity. So in a relationship, for example, once the two individuals stop focusing on their argument, my argument's right, your argument's wrong, you need to be more like this, you need to be more like that. What then happens is, what really destroys that whole kind of tension and that whole polarity is 8th house, which is insecurities, fears, worries, projections that we bring. And each individual actually has to face their fears and their own, drama and their own insecurities and stresses. So this eclipse happening in the 8th house from where, or the lunar eclipse, which is the contrast point, happening in the 8th house from where the solar eclipse happened, shows this kind of potential to just obliterate and destroy the collective sort of fascination with the argument, and literally kind of just destroy it. If that makes sense. It's kind of subtle. It's kind of tricky. It's easy to use the political model now because it's so rampant in not just in U.S. culture, but in global culture. You see these things happening in England, where there's a big break to maybe cease from the EU or to secede from the EU. You see it in a lot of government, a lot of governments around the world, like I've been saying for months, where especially things like immigrants and what kind of country people want to be in these are all issues of Virgo, about how to manage these big themes, these larger structures and systems like the government and the people, and our government and our country in relation to other countries, and these big themes that tend to seem too big to manage. And Aquarius is where it's very big, because it's literally the global culture, the global landscape. And we had the solar eclipse in Aquarius, which is that kind of collective, because like for instance, the world is, especially here in the United States, finally, especially the leaders in the Republican Party are starting to wake up to the idea that this man who is like leading their party and might be their nominee for president, these words he says impacts the whole world. I mean, I don't know why it took him so long to wake up to it, for God's sake. Many people have been saying for months, myself included, that this dangerous, reckless rhetoric of challenging other countries and other leaders and on about Mexico and the criminals and the Mexican government and this one, and he's attacked Japan and China, everybody. Like this ridiculously dangerous rhetoric, especially now going on about torture, and nothing is off limits to this reckless man's, anything can come out of his mouth. Finally now, even his own party is starting to completely revolt against him. Not even starting, they've completely rebelled against him, because they're finally paying attention to the specifics and realizing this has ramifications all over the world. Not just even in the US, it's not just he'll implode or whatever. They should have been taken on his rhetoric from the very beginning, but again, and those are big Aquarian themes, the whole world and our relation to the whole world, our government in relationship to the whole world, like I've been saying. But now with the full moon in Virgo, it doesn't just keep that tension going, it actually destroys it. And it gets destroyed by focusing on the details, because it's Aquarius and Virgo. Aquarius is the big collective, Virgo are the minute details, and scrutinizing every little detail. So we're seeing it come, we're seeing this eclipse energy is going to be carried into the next many months. And you see the die has been cast. The die has been cast as soon as this eclipse month started, which I said about a month ago. We were in the jaws of the eclipse in the Kala Sarpa Yoga. Immediately, like right after that, you saw the former head of the Republican Party, Mitt Romney, come out and challenge Trump. It hasn't dented his status yet, but what it has done is shown a deep rift that's almost unrecoverable from the current Republican Party, regardless of what happens going forward. As soon as the planets got into the eclipse cycle, you saw these collective themes happen. It's not just us and our culture and our citizens in relation to each other, but also on the global scale. You saw that finally larger themes have been realized, and it's because you have the solar eclipse in Aquarius, and the lunar eclipse, the harmonizing point, is in Virgo, which is totally destroying it. And the Republican Party is ready to even totally destroy itself on some level in the name of what you would call conservatism, which is a Republican principle. They're ready to even destroy the whole party. If the nominee is someone like Trump, who doesn't represent conservatism, they're ready to just destroy the whole thing. Perhaps run a third-party candidate against him, running a candidate against their own candidate, just to make sure some form of conservatism survives. For example, this is the kind of thing where they're ready to destroy the whole thing if it means preserving those specific details, that Virgo kind of focus on precision. So notice how this plays out in your life. Notice how your bigger picture, your collective community and your relationship with the world and the government and your personal power and all of those themes are being somewhat sacrificed and challenged on a more specific level to actually understand and scrutinize not just the concept of I'm mad at the government, but I need to now focus in a much more narrow way. And there's a pressure to actually get down to a much more narrow and precise picture to completely obliterate the previous paradigm. And so, in addition to that, the nakshatra is Uttara Bhadrapada, which is actually the nakshatra of organizing all of the details in the kingdom. So the first nakshatra in Virgo is Uttara Bhadrapada. Uttara Falguni. Uttara Falguni. Uttara Falguni, which is ruled by the god Aryaman. He's related to contracts and official stuff. It's also called the marriage star, where people like to get married often. It's a kind of general, quality. But marriage shows a sort of accord with another, and you'll see that this deity Aryaman is often paired with the other god called Mitra. Aryaman and Mitra, who is the god of friendliness and friendship, were often linked in the Vedas, in the Rig Veda especially. You'll see Aryaman and Mitra. It was linked with other ones as well, but mainly those two when it came to establishing a contract. Marriage is a contract. And this is the first nakshatra in Virgo, the last one in Leo, the first one in Virgo. And it refers to exactly what I'm talking about, where the power of the kingdom needs to be organized into specific tasks and delegated. And if that's going to happen, there needs to be accord with others. There needs to be friendliness and friendship and trust and commonality of purpose and, sacrifice to something higher. Very much about things like political service in its highest virtue. Of course, now, because of other things that corrupt the political process, political service is often a good career move, which it's okay that it is, but it's so corrupted with, kickbacks and, all kinds of things that are not necessarily in service of the kingdom. Again, this is a huge theme right now for our world is getting it right, and in many ways sort of trying to destroy the system of corruption, very much about this first nakshatra in Virgo. Especially you see it with the eminence of Bernie Sanders, the Democratic Republican challenger to Hillary Clinton, who is everything. He comes back to the only real issue is corruption, is money and politics. And if you don't address that, none of the rest of it matters. And it's a very resonant message. And it's addressing this, that there is no honor and, friendliness with the government and the system as far as it goes with the people. It is if you're an insider, but then it's all about exploitation. So again, that theme on a political, worldly, global sphere is also, definitely being seen right now. And again, in our personal lives, we can also have a relationship to this. Sometimes people don't like when I talk about the world and the political scene and the way these things impact on a global level. So if you don't like that, I'm sorry, but I see it on that level right now in a big way. I see the world as there are so many big things, and we're very dominated by these themes. And hopefully you can migrate this over into your life in some way. I try to make it relative for both, because you also have a relationship with culture, and you also have a desire and capacity to serve, but also you have to break it down, and your capacity to do that is also based on the same themes of being able to work with others, being able to be of service, to also be formal and literal and precise. And Uttar Falguni shows the power of that. It's called the marriage star. One of the reasons is because a good marriage requires those kinds of things. And a marriage not necessarily doesn't have to be a relationship with two people. It can be a marriage of, teacher and student, or person in their job, or all kinds of different things. They get along because we're willing to be thorough, precise, and establish a common ground where everyone benefits, and where we're not just extracting value, but we're also giving value. And, similar themes are also at play right now. We have, Mercury at the time of the eclipse will also be pretty close to the sun, pretty combust behind the sun and debilitated. So Mercury at this time is also not delivering the kind of discrimination that we would like. Mercury is the ruler of the moon, because the moon is in Virgo. And so the ruler of that moon, which is being eclipsed, is also debilitated and combust. So there could definitely be, we might look for some real emotional frustration and aggression coming out around the time of the eclipse on March 23rd. So, as we get closer to that date, we may definitely see some frustration and some real explosive rhetoric, especially in the political world. I mean, that's almost saying nothing at this point, because we've already seen things like not riots, but fights at Trump demonstrations, and Trump rallies, and we may see an increase in this kind of thing. And by the way, we're going to see a lot more of it. This is also obviously indicative of the same kind of thing that I was describing earlier. But, so this debilitated Mercury, what happens when Mercury's debilitated is we're not focused on the details. It's debilitated in Pisces, which is all the details merging into one, and we're not thinking clearly, we're thinking emotionally, speaking emotionally, and not being precise. Again, that's the word. So we might be all over the map about expressing these things, unfortunately not just now, but for the next several months, because these eclipse moments are actually cycles. And this cycle of sun eclipse in Aquarius, moon eclipse in Virgo, that's the prevailing energy. And it's one of the big reasons why you're seeing the Trump phenomena, which has been like a social phenomena, getting obliterated on some level. Like anyone but Trump. Never Trump. Like that whole thing. He's a great representation of this, the rise of this rhetoric and this social, kind of dominating social dialogue for quite a while. And now, once the eclipse cycle started, there's been an attempt to completely destroy it. So we may see a more confusing rhetoric around this for quite a while. And again, in your personal life, you could see how well are you interpreting these things in your head first, because that's what Mercury is. It's first the voice in your head, then how that compels you to, how that, translates into the words that come out of your mouth. And then, of course, the sun is also in Pisces. So there's also enormous mystical potential, enormous mystical power where we can really see on a much higher level, much higher altitude, and connect with a much deeper cosmic principle than all of this worldly morass. And this is really what the sun in Pisces, and even with Mercury there, holds. This is the promise that's held with that. And the eclipses, again, they're important times where we intersect with that void, where we intersect with that plane of reality that's not just of this earth. This energetic vortex is really what the nodes are, and what we enter as we get closer to that eclipse. So as we get closer to the 23rd, you can really feel your meditations deepening and your relationship to something that's much more about cosmic unity start to grab hold of your mind and allow you to come from a more compassionate place rather than a place that's polarized and stimulated. And even if you're not already, the stress of the world right now is high because of all of this. We look around and we see, we would have never imagined the level of rhetoric and the level of frustration and anger and things about to spill over like we see now. So taking a stance and a position behind all of that in a much higher vibrational frequency is also possible now. So anyway, if you want to know how this affects your sign, you can do that for just 1 penny and also get daily forecasts and a lot of other things. So check that out as well.